We're going to continue our study through the life of Solomon. We're getting to the end of that one. Just a quick reminder that Easthomer is starting the evangelism workshop, I think, today. If I'm not, well, I think it actually starts tomorrow. Is that what it is? Or just start this evening? It starts today. Okay. And runs through. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know exactly how that was scheduled. I just know it's starting. And so they're there so if you have time this week, it'd be good. It's every evening at 7:00. 6:30. Well, they went and changed the time. That's not the biblically mandated time for the evening worship. All right, good. 6:30, Easthomer evangelism workshop, and that's what's the guy's name? Atkins? Is that or it doesn't matter. It'll be awesome just to go and through Wednesday.
I got the guy's schedule, and boy, he's really using up his time in Alaska because then he's doing a 2-day workshop in South Anchorage on Thursday. I think it's Thursday and Friday or Friday and Saturday. I can't remember which. Then he's going to the Wasilla Church of Christ on Sunday through Wednesday of next week. Then he's going to Isleston.
Oh my goodness.
The following week.
He's going to be wore out.
He has like 2 days that he's not like teaching the class.
That's really cool. I respect that. He'll be tired when he gets home. He'll need to come to Alaska one time just to go fishing. 1 Kings chapter 11. We're studying through, I just love how we're doing this. We're taking our time, moving through the Bible one chapter at a time. We've moved from Genesis all the way to 1 Kings, and we've explored a lot of material over the past several years now, and it's been really kind of fun. I have been studying and thinking about this chapter, and I have lots of things I would like to bring out of it, but I want to pause for a moment and just ask you real quick, where are we at in the story? What's going on? Who are we talking about in the course of human history? Just give me the big perspective here. We're sitting on the moon. We're looking at these ants on this blue planet. What's happening?
We're at the very height of Israel as a nation.
That's right. We're at the height of the nation of Israel. What does that mean, Silas? What do you mean at the height of?
Well, as far as politically, God's blessing the nation. They're the most powerful they've ever been.
Yeah. And they're about as powerful as they'll ever be. Cameron, tell me what you know about Solomon. Just anything, just whatever you think about Solomon. When you think about Solomon, what's the word that comes to your mind? Or tell me something about him that's unique. Because I like you, man, and every time you open your mouth, you say something cool. Nothing? What was his prayer? What did he ask for? Anybody?
Wisdom.
All right, so that's what we think about when Solomon, right? We think about Solomon. He's the guy that asked for wisdom, right? What's that mean exactly? What is wisdom? Let's talk about that for a second. What is wisdom? Anybody have a definition for wisdom?
I was just thinking of the saying about knowledge and wisdom, the difference that knowledge is knowing that the tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put it in fruit salad.
I was thinking of a similar parable earlier. So knowledge is knowing facts, right? It's a knowing or defining or understanding facts. Wisdom is the application of facts. For instance, knowledge, another one I thought about this one, it's kind of fun, is knowledge is knowing what a hammer and nail is used for, right? Wisdom is knowing that you never want to hold a nail while someone else is using a hammer. That's not what you want to do, right? That's not what you want to do. It's yeah. Sometimes you don't want to. It's funny. I'm always good at whacking myself with the hammer, right? Yeah, I got to where sometimes I hold it with the channel locks. Right on. So what's the problem right now? What are we going to be getting into right now? We have Solomon. Solomon is David's son. David was a man after God's own heart, and he had this desire, right? And so he says, man, God, I'd like to build you a house. And God is just thrilled with that idea. But because David was a man of war, God says, listen, you're not going to be able to do this. David's heart's really beautiful. And the fact that he's like, no problem. I'll just set my son up for success. Who is Solomon? But how?
David's son.
How?
How?
It's going to come into play in this chapter. Yeah, no, you're right. No, you're there. You're there. So, unfortunately, David, who is a man after God's own heart, who is a man who's very busy pursuing God, he's fighting Goliath, and he's, fighting, the Israel nation's enemies, and he's trying to help, finish, God's promise and conquering the land, and he's about God's business, and he's, very much employed in trying to pursue that, and he finds himself one day having arrived. Right, all the major work is done. I think this year I'll stay at home, and so all the kings go out to war the way you're supposed to go out to war, and he decides he's going to hang out and be at home. And we have Bathsheba, Uriah's wife. David commits adultery. Then David's son, as a product of that adultery, dies, and later, through the same relationship, we have Solomon. All right, everybody on board there? That's a hard deal. So Solomon's a product of sexual sin. And we get into this chapter here where Solomon has now fulfilled David's, concept. We have this wonderful expression of love. David wants to build God a home. And so we have this idea, and Solomon is executing this plan. In the very beginning of Solomon's life, we see this man who asks for wisdom. He has the wisdom to ask for wisdom. I just love that. He's a young man, and he has the wisdom to ask for wisdom, which I think is key. It takes a degree of wisdom to ask for wisdom, to realize I need your help, God. And he fulfills his dad's plans, and he's honoring God by building this temple and building, this house. And again, we're going to get to the fulfillment of this. We're going to get to where, the work is accomplished. And now we're at the end of Solomon's life. I want to suggest to you, just by our own study, I probably the writing of Proverbs, and the writing of or Solomon's Proverbs and Solomon's Psalms and Ecclesiastes has probably already happened during this period of time. Because what we're going to begin looking at in First Kings chapter 11 now is Solomon's downfall, his decline. Let's start here in 1 Kings chapter 11. We've just ended with the building of the temple. We just ended with God's response. We just ended with the Queen of Sheba, and she comes and she's overwhelmed, and we have sacrifice, and we have spiritual focus, and we have affluence and power, and Israel's really powerful politically and militarily and as a nation and identity, and it's all perfect and it's all comfortable, and we all have country club memberships, and we can go to Subway and get an easy meal, and everything's simple. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh. And there's a colon here because we're just going to have a list. It's so bad. Moab, not even going to talk about names. I mean, this is like women he's collected. Moabite women, Amorite women, Edomite women, Sidonian women, Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these women, clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines. That's 1,000 women. What's the problem here? What's the problem? Say that again? Come on now.
I said 999 too many.
Yeah, that's right.
You shall not enter into marriage. It's strange that Solomon had this wisdom and God warned him twice. Follow after.
That's the chapter right there. How does a wise man do this? I mean, we're all like, what? Right?
And then, and it seems like when you get to a place where you're comfortable and you start relaxing is when Satan attacks.
Yeah. Well, that right there, Danny, is that's why I brought David and Bathsheba in this earlier. That's right. As soon as we lose sight of the fact that you never arrive, as soon as you lose sight of the fact that there's always a war, as soon as you think, we're okay, man, you're in trouble.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what Solomon did. He completed the temple and he completed all the buildings and everything was magnificent. And he had horses that he wasn't supposed to have. And then he had wives that he wasn't supposed to have. And
So I think it's really important to read the Bible from a perspective of, why has God taken the time to record this for me, Jeff Jaworski? This is a history of God's people, a history of how, God's people have interacted with the world and with him. And it's a history of God fulfilling promises. And it's not all pretty. That's why the book has credibility. I mean, it tells the story as it is. It's not always pretty. It's not always, you read the history of the Babylonians or other, written histories, and they're always trying to highlight the good and they don't write about the bad. This is credible in that way. What's the problem here? What's Solomon's problem? It's my wife pointed out this morning as we're talking about this and studying, and I was just sharing with her my study, and we were just interact every morning. We try to do that, so we don't do it every morning, but we try to do it every morning. A lot of times, man, it's we want to talk about Eve. Man, she messed up, and these women, man, it's all about these women. They don't even have names. Who's named here? Solomon has an addiction. He is an addict. There is more women here than there are days of the year. Right? This is a sex addict. He has a problem. This is a problem. You know what this number on the board means? It's a very disturbing number. According to several articles published in Christian magazines, studies trying to pursue what we're struggling with as a culture. Apparently, according to Christian Chronicle here about 4 or 5 years ago and a couple other articles that are referenced, this is the number. 60% of men in the Church of Christ have actively viewed some form of pornography in the last week. Yeah. Now, this is a broad paintbrush. This is not meaning a man has gone to a porn site, but it does mean that he's looking at things in his email or going to a website or whatever. When you live in Corinth, it's very difficult to not come in contact with it. It's very difficult to not come in contact with it. This is where this story and today have intersected. It's a problem from day one, and it's a serious problem. When you live in a world when you can't drive down I-20 in Dallas without seeing a half-clothed woman, when you can't shop online without an image popping up, we've all seen it, right? I mean, you can't interact with this device without it being put in your face. These guys, these young generations, they're coming. I was playing a dominoes game the other day on my phone, and another ad came up on my phone about a card game, and you could choose to either collect money or undress the girl. This is sick. This is sick. When you live surrounded by that, it becomes a real problem. And it's difficult because this is something that you can do behind a closed door when no one else is watching. This is Solomon's struggle. Solomon is overwhelmed with a sexual addiction, and it's going to be his downfall. How does a wise man get consumed by that? Let's just keep reading. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Asheroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Amorites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did not wholly follow the Lord as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Moloch, the abomination of the Amorites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all of his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrifice to their gods. And the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my commandment and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David, my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen. Talk to me about what's happening here.
Well, there's a lot of things happening here. One thing, one of many, is the fact that sometimes our actions have consequences that we won't even live to see.
Man, dude, that's a rich teaching in this passage. And it goes all the way back to David, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so David started this. I mean, it's a hard fact, but Solomon is struggling from sexual sin that unfortunately finds its roots in David. I mean, David one day was on his roof and saw a woman and went after something that wasn't his. He had no right to. That's a difficult thing to deal with in your mind. What was her part of that? Did she have any part of that? Did she have any choice? Probably. Who knows? I mean, in that culture, probably not. But who knows what actually ended up happening? It doesn't matter. There was a sexual sin, and that sexual sin had immediate consequence, and unfortunately, it has long-term consequence, and it's affected Solomon. And Solomon's sin here is going to end up affecting the whole nation of Israel. It's going to have ongoing consequence. That's definitely part of the story here. What else are we seeing? I'm seeing some prophecy, right, about what's about to happen to this nation that's at its pinnacle. We're going to be ended up with a split kingdom here in a little while. We're going to end up with a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, Judah. And that's going to get explored a little bit more in the passage as we read. In fact, what basically follows in the next verses is just prophecy and foreshadowing of how that's going to unfold, who Solomon's enemies are going to become, and how that's going to unfold, and Jeroboam, who's going to end up being the king of the northern kingdom. In fact, we can just keep reading. Verse 14, the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal house of Edom, for when David was in Edom and Joab, the commander of the army, went up to bury the slain, he struck down every male in Edom, for Joab and all of Israel remained there 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. But Hadad fled to Egypt together with certain Edomites of his father's servants. Hadad still being a little child, they set out from Midian and came to Paran and took men with them from Paran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him an allowance of food and gave him land. And Hadad found great favor in the sight of Pharaoh, so that he gave him in marriage the sister of his own wife. And the story continues here. Verse 23, God also raised up as an adversary to him Rezon, the son of Eliad, who had fled from his master. I'm really butchering these names. Hadadezer, king of Zoab, and he gathered men about him and became leader of a marauding band. And then we're introduced to Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zedorah. And this right here, we need to take time to actually read the details here, because we see some prophecy. Verse 26, Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zeradoc, the son of Solomon, whose mother's name was Zerah, a widow, also lifted up his hand against the king. And this was the reason why he lifted up his hand against the king. Solomon built the Milo and closed up the breach of the city of David, his father. The man Jeroboam was very able. And when Solomon saw that the young man was industrious, he gave him charge over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. And at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah, the Shilamite, found him on the road. And now Eliah had dressed himself in a new garment, and the two of them were alone in the open country. When Ahijah laid hold of the new garment that was on him and tore it into 12 pieces, and he said to Jeroboam, "Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and will give you 10 tribes. But he shall have one tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Shemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the Amorites. And they had not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and keeping my statutes and my rules, as David, his father, did. Nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him ruler all the days of his life, for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose, who kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand and will give it to you. 10 tribes. Why 10 tribes? Talk to me about, there's 12 tribes of Israel, right? And we're dealing with 10 tribes goes to Jeroboam, and David's son gets to keep, or the Solomon's son's going to get to keep one. Where's the other one at? That's 10 plus 1 is 11, right? We're dealing with real estate here, right? We're dealing with real estate. So why isn't there a 12th tribe? The Levites don't own land. That's right. So we have 10 sections of real estate here, and they're being divided up. This is prophecy about the split kingdom. Yet to his son I will give one tribe, that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I've chosen to put my name. And I will take you, and you shall reign over all that your soul desires, and you shall be king over Israel. And here we go, verse 38. And last week we went back to some of this idea in Deuteronomy 28. We have this reoccurring theme, regardless of who's doing what, where God makes it real clear. Look, if you pursue me and you obey my commandments and you honor me and you try to walk in my ways, blessings will come. If you reject me and you turn your back on me and you pursue your own lust, there will be consequences. It's blessings and cursings. It's mentioned many times throughout the Bible, referenced many times, and it's restated many times. It's alongside of the covenant. Verse 38, and if you will listen to all that I command you and will walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you and will build you a sure house as I built for David. And I will give Israel to you, and I will afflict the offspring of David because of this, but not forever, excuse me. Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam rose and fled into Egypt. Man, we got this Egypt problem. We got this Egypt problem, don't we? I mean, they're rescued out of Egypt. Egypt's always a thorn in their side. We have wives from Egypt that shouldn't be wives from Egypt. We got people, when they have trouble with God's people, they flee to Egypt. What is the problem here? Why does Egypt keep popping up? Why is that? What's up with that? Somebody talk to me about why Egypt keeps reoccurring. Egypt will go on to be kind of a thorn and later just sort of a symbol of rebellion, a symbol of the seedbed of evil, the symbol of rebellion really is what that becomes. It becomes kind of a symbol of that whole deal.
We have, Israel came out of Egypt, they were slaves there. We have that Egypt is, a great power in the world. And they're far enough away, they're not always, it's not the continuous conflict like the people in the land. I mean, there are fights there, and Solomon's married to Pharaoh's daughter right now. I mean, that's his wife, that's his first.
That's actually that's why it's mentioned in the first part of the chapter, right? He's married to Pharaoh's daughter, which is a wife you shouldn't have, but at least she's your wife. And then all these other women, the 999. Yeah. Egypt is also a symbol of something that's wrong in Israel's heart, isn't it? Yeah, it's a symbol. Yes, ma'am.
I see it as a symbol of their bondage to sin.
Yeah.
They're going back to bondage,
Yeah.
leaving God.
What do you mean by bondage? I mean, it's not something to just chain to. It's something they're turning back to.
Right.
I mean, how far are they out of Egypt? And they're in the desert. And they're thinking, man, we should just go back to, right? We should go back to Egypt, where we were, whipped and mistreated and all that, but at least we had bread. I mean, there's a problem with the human condition here. It's a problem with the human condition here. We chase after our own lust. We chase after our own bondage. We chase after things that are not God. I think that's part of the story here. We read this and we want to indict Solomon, man, the wise man that just wasn't wise. We want to indict the women because, they're obviously, so much in control of this. I mean, they got nothing. I mean, this guy's going around and a dad has a beautiful daughter and Solomon's just coming around saying, well, this one looks good. Let's take her. I mean, the women are not at fault here. God loves these women like he loves every part of his creation. And Solomon's the issue in his own lust. And the problem is he's got way too much power because he's sitting on a throne that belongs to God. The problem is rebellion. That's why Egypt keeps popping back up. It's not just some place that Israel was in bondage at. It's some place that for some reason Israel wants to go back to. It's a sad situation. Talk to me about the prophecy part here. What's about to happen? What is the prophet here talking about? What is about to happen here in the next few chapters, actually?
Divide the kingdom's been divided.
Yeah. Solomon has turned his back on God. He has chased after his own lust. He is now overcome by sin. And all of these women are having an influence on his heart. His heart now has rebelled against God. And he has built all of these places of worship for idols. And God is about to judge Solomon. And rightfully so. And so what's going to end up happening is we're going to have a split kingdom. We're going to have a divided kingdom. God's going to be faithful to his promise to David, and therefore keep the nation of Judah intact so that he can bring Christ through that. But he's going to take the rest of the nation of Israel away from Solomon's heirs, and we're going to have a divided. And as Silas already pointed out, that's going to become the downfall. It's going to become a downward spiral from there. What else are we seeing in this chapter? It's hard for me, the ending of this chapter. And this is the end of Solomon's life. This is what's written about Solomon. We have this really hard story. Now, the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the books of the acts of Solomon? And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David his father. And Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. Solomon did a lot of really cool things. I mean, he carried the torch of his dad. He fulfilled his dad's desires. In the beginning of his story, he does the right thing. He recognized, I need wisdom to reign. I need wisdom. I need your help, God. And so he asks for he has wisdom to ask for wisdom. And he accomplishes all these wonderful things. In a sense, he's raised in the church. And he pursues the right things, and he accomplishes a lot of wonderful works. But the end result of Solomon's life is really not pretty. It's really hard to deal with this. The man, although he did lots of good things, in the end, what's God most concerned about? What he did or his heart? That's the subject, right? The women turned his heart away. It's in his heart that the struggle is happening. This is what God's wanting us to see here, that all the things that you do, they have value, but really what God's most interested in is in your heart. I love the comparison of Solomon and Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to meet him later. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Chaldeans, and then later Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar is a man who's born in complete debauchery, right? I mean, and he's burned in the people of God's saddle, and he ends up conquering nations and taking people enslaved. But he comes up against God with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, and over a course of time, he begins to recognize, wow, your God's real. And he ends up munching grass for several years in the backyard, and ends up some of the last words written about Nebuchadnezzar is he recognizes God, big G God, as God. I just think that's interesting. These two characters. I love these comparisons of David's heart and Saul's heart, Solomon's heart, and later Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to come against these kings. We end up with one king who is born with the knowledge of God and is exposed to it and pursues wisdom, but his heart is taken away. Another man's heart is completely overwhelmed by culture, and over a course of time, coming up against the truth of God, begins to soften. And I wonder what's there for us. In the end, what's most important is where you are here. And we need to be careful about the things that we pursue. The lusts that pursue us, and understanding the power of that. I'm disturbed by the story that despite the fact that he had wisdom, well, let's go over here for a minute. Over in Romans chapter 1, I just want to read a few verses just to hear now God's perspective on how he views people, and just thinking carefully about the gospel. The first chapter of Romans, Paul is leveling some accusations He begins with this idea of gospel, and he's going to go back to the idea of gospel. In chapter 1:16, Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation. It's the power of God to save everyone who believes. To the Jew first, this is the course of human history, and also to the Greek. This is a linear course of history. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed. Being right with God is being revealed. A path to rightness with God is revealed from faith for faith. That is written, the righteous shall live by faith. And he's going to go on, and he's going to demonstrate a few things here. Basically, that human ethics, wisdom, and knowledge is not enough. It's not enough. We need the gospel. We need Jesus. We need his help. Verse 18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who through their unrighteousness suppress truth. And later on in 23, they make an exchange. They exchange the glory of the immortal God for images. Verse 24, God gives them up in the lusts of their heart to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchange. Here's an exchange again, the truth of God for a lie. Verse 26, God gives them up to dishonorable passions for their women, exchange natural relationships for those that are contrary to nature. Verse 28, God gives them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. God is mad. He's angry. He's upset because we actively exchange truth for lie, lust for purity, and God will give us up to that. And so at the end of chapter 1, all the Jews were thinking, yeah, good job, man. We have identified how all these heathens in the world are going to hell. And then chapter 2, verse 1. You therefore, oh man, he's talking to Jews. Every one of you who judges, you have no excuse, oh man, every one of you judges, for in judging another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, practice the very same things. We know that the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice such things. Do you suppose, oh man, you who judge those who practice such things and yet do them yourselves, that you will escape the judgment of God? Then he goes on to talk to the Jews, about the fact that you struggle from the same things. We struggle. Humanity struggles from the same things. And the end result is we are in desperate need of God. Let's go over here to chapter 3, verse 1 and verse 21. I've just totally moved through a lot of really big content too fast, but that's the end result of chapters 1, 2, and 3. Is it doesn't matter who you are. We're all on level ground at the foot of the cross. We are in desperate need of God doing something for us that Solomon wasn't able to do for himself. Nebuchadnezzar's not able to do for himself. Saul can't do for himself. David can't do for himself. We can't do for ourselves. 21 says, but now the righteousness of God is manifest apart from the law. Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it, the righteousness of God through faith in Christ Jesus for all who believe. For there is no distinction. All have sinned and all have fallen short of the glory of God and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. For God put forward as a propitiation by his blood to be revealed by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance, he has passed over former sins. We're going back to Egypt right there. He's using a phrase there that's supposed to prick these guys' hearts. He's passing over former sins to show his righteousness from the present time, so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Christ Jesus. As we read through this history here, and we struggle with Solomon and his decisions, we struggle with his lust, we need to understand that his story is very much our story. And if we're not careful, if we don't protect our hearts, if we don't pursue God and understand the power of Christ, if we don't protect ourselves from the things that would drag us away, then it can be bad. The same blessings, though, are available to us. That if we, just like the promise that God is now handing to Jeroboam, if we walk in his ways and we do what is right in his eyes by keeping his commandments and pursuing his faithfulness, then we will be blessed as well. So this story is our story. as we read through this. We need to see that the same struggle is our struggle. It may not be sex. It may be money. It may be things. It may be, all kinds of stuff can pull us away from our God. The question is, what are we going to do with that? And the gospel says you can give it to God and lean into Jesus. Any other thoughts or perspectives before we close up? Nope. All right. Let's begin for our worship. I just read the book.